Welcome to the Relationship Toolbox, a show about learning the skills for building positive relationships with others. Our colleague Tracy, who usually appears with us, another mediator, will be on vacation again, so she will join us next time. Today we are going to do a show on discussing and demonstrating how to give an effective apology, how to offer them, and what are the components of a good apology.
Because, Tom, sometimes we're wrong. Even I'm wrong.
Unfortunately,
yes. Even I'm wrong, and even you're wrong sometimes.
Yes, my wife would agree with that, yes.
But it's hard because it can be embarrassing. Mm-hmm. It can make us feel shamed. So it's hard to admit.
Yes.
And we might feel intimidated if we're having to apologize to somebody who's more powerful than we are. And it might require some humility and vulnerability if you're in a different kind of power situation where you need to apologize to somebody who might have less power in the relationship. Mm-hmm. So it's tricky. However, if you can acknowledge what happened and learn from it, accept some responsibility, it can help you move on, and there might even be some healing.
Yes.
Apologies are kind of a ritual. And we don't talk about that ritual. It's a communication ritual, an interpersonal ritual that can bring us closure. And
actually closer together.
Yeah, sometimes. We talk about conflict all the time, but this is kind of how do you bring that to closure? How do you repair it? How do you get beyond once you've done all of the understanding exercises? So, but you have to kind of show some regret, some responsibility, and some remorse or promise or pledge that it won't happen again. And we don't always offer apologies. Collectively, sometimes they're not effectively offered or poorly delivered. And so that's why we want to talk about it today.
There is a real skill to this.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you have to be conscious of it. And I think we're going to show some examples first of things that might be masquerading as apologies that really are not apologies. For instance, if I said, "Oh, sorry about that," how would you feel?
That's one of the things that bugs me the most when I hear that. And it seems as if that is done very frequently. Something someone else does. It could be even someone in a store. It could be in a personal relationship. And there's just sort of a precursory, "Oh, sorry about that," and then we go on. And, you know, the thoughts that I'm left with are sort of, man, that was kind of superficial and automatic. And what was the commitment to anything in the way that was stated and delivered? So it really doesn't serve in the way of an apology that we're going to be talking about to heal the relationship. It may leave me with more questions or even some resentment.
Right. You don't feel satisfied by that exchange.
Exactly. Yes.
But yet, you can feel awkward about it because the word sorry was in the statement.
Yes.
So you feel funny about kind of saying, well, that wasn't really an apology. It was kind of a superficial castaway remark, but there wasn't anything for me in that.
Right. Because you're doubting, what was that?
Yeah, it was just dismissive. And like I'm not ready to move on because I don't feel like I really got an apology because it didn't have the aspects of an apology. But technically, the person has said sorry, but it isn't an apology.
Right.
Yeah.
So another one that bothers me a lot is when someone says, "Oh, I'm sorry you feel that way."
Ooh, yeah. Again, the word sorry is included in the comment, but then you've put the weight back on me. Sorry that we're not talking about the situation, we're not talking about you anymore. It's all back on me, who might have been the person who was injured or harmed, and it just is making me more angry.
Sure.
Because it's not about me, it's about you.
Right.
So, again, technically, the word sorry is there, but that's not an apology.
So if I say, "I'm sorry that you are hurt by what I said," I'm still shifting that sense of responsibility and almost implying in a subtle way there must be something wrong with you to have taken what I said or what I did that way with it, even though, as you say, the words sorry, I am sorry are in there with it. So again, it doesn't rise to the standard we're looking for in an effective apology.
Right. I almost feel some judgment sometimes when somebody will say, well, I'm sorry you were hurt. Like you shouldn't have been.
Right, yes.
Because
yes.
you just shouldn't have been.
Sometimes they outright say it, you're so sensitive, or if you weren't so sensitive.
And that invalidates it. But even if they don't and they say, you know, I'm sorry that you were hurt. It's not unlike saying something like, I'm sorry that this happened. Again, they might be admitting that there was some wrongdoing at that point. But there's still a disconnect with taking any responsibility, inserting themselves in it.
Right. It sort of happened, not necessarily like, I caused it.
Like it happened spontaneously, all by itself, without any kind of like, and it's passive. It's like, I'm sorry that you were hurt. I'm sorry that it happened. And they're not involved in the apology. It's a little bit closer than the, I'm sorry you were hurt or you are hurt, because there is a glimpse of empathy or remorse about what happened. There still isn't any connection or any acknowledgement of a responsibility.
And then there's, of course, the apology that says, I'm sorry, but.
Yeah.
And then comes the excuse. I'm sorry I yelled at you, but you know I have such a temper. So it's an excuse that I'm giving. It could be, I was tired, I wasn't feeling well, I've had a bad day. And again, it sort of seems to imply that, well, you should excuse it because of what I was going through. Again, it's about me without really owning anything with it. And I haven't really acknowledged that I have hurt you in any way or that I feel remorse for it.
Yeah, like there were mitigating circumstances
right.
that were beyond my control. I have no free will, and I couldn't help myself.
Right.
And so, because there was traffic, you know, I'm sorry I yelled at you, but you know how I am in traffic. Or I'm sorry I was impatient, but I was hungry.
Yes.
Or I'm sorry, whatever. That it almost, they're looking for like a free pass.
Yes.
You know,
yes. You should excuse me for it.
Right, and that's what it is. It's an excuse. It's a request for an excuse. It's this is an excuse. This is a justification for my bad behavior, which you should no longer think of as bad behavior because of these other circumstances. So any time that you say, I'm sorry, but, you've basically negated the sorry. You've taken away the power of those words. And in many cases are putting it back on somewhere else. It's not unlike when somebody says, well, I didn't mean to. I didn't intend to. And, this happens to me all the time. Sometimes in school with young people, they'll say, well, you know, I didn't mean to hit her with a chair. It's like, okay, so your honorable intentions or the lack of bad intentions doesn't erase the outcome. There was still harm. And I think it's even less visible when it's an emotional harm. You know, you say, well, I didn't mean to hurt your feelings, or I didn't mean to be late, or I didn't mean to whatever it is that you did. That doesn't excuse the outcome. Right. It doesn't erase it. You don't get a free pass just because you had good intentions.
Right.
And I think when something happens like, I didn't mean to run over your bicycle. Okay, but you did. Yeah. So you owe me an apology. Let's repair it. There's harm that's done regardless of good intentions. But I think
The
people
intention
offer
may
that.
make it understandable, but
Right.
still not okay.
Right.
Whether then the person who's been harmed by this or hurt by it needs to hear something more than what the excuse was or what the reason was.
Right. You're still left with the pain or the injury or the what's left over from the wrongdoing. So,
And then there's the apology that shifts the responsibility for the action totally, and almost makes the person who's been harmed feel guilty.
okay. Like for instance.
So, you know, if I'm saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry, but that was insensitive of me," but I just hate that about myself. You know, I've really got to work on that. But
Okay.
I always say the wrong thing.
All right. So the exaggerated, like I'm the worst
Yes.
person in the world.
Right.
You know.
So feel sorry for me rather than
Right.
I'm taking accountability for what I did because I hurt you.
Right. So if you've said I'm the least sensitive person in the world, I just I'm a buffoon, then the listener has three options. She can either say, "Yeah, you're right," which may not help
That's not
the
gonna help
progress of the and they may feel that way, or say nothing, and then that comment is just hanging out there.
Sure.
Or come to your rescue and say, "Oh no, Tom, you're generally you're a very sensitive person, and you're not the worst person in the world." And then I, as the potential victim in the wrongdoing, am now taking care of you,
Right.
and I haven't gotten your apology.
And that, I think, almost in a subconscious way, or maybe in a conscious way, is what I intended by trying to get you to feel sorry for me.
Yeah.
I don't have to apologize then. You are actually coming to my rescue and helping me to feel better about it. So the accountability goes out the window.
Yeah. And if you can't be kind of humble or vulnerable in giving your apology, that may be one of the tools that you use when you exaggerate what you did, so that in the response that the other person has, they minimize it.
Right.
It's like, "It wasn't that bad, you're okay." And then you feel relieved. Whew, I got that apology in, but I don't have to feel diminished in any way. I don't have to feel ashamed or remorseful or regretful, because it's like done. And
Yes.
they patched it all up.
And sometimes you can tell that the intent was to sort of engage you in that way, because if you had, as you mentioned, if you were to agree with me, yes, you are insensitive, I might get angry at that point. So
right.
I'm not really saying this is something I need to work on. It's, well, how dare you agree with me?
Yeah.
So
But I've said things like that. Sometimes it's not intended to minimize my impact on what I've done. It's to try to show the other person just how sorry I really am. But instead of saying, "I'm really sorry," I'm trying to exaggerate the harm that I may have done, to kind of show you that I'm really sorry, that I'm like an awful person. I shouldn't have been like whatever. So you can't always tell what the intention is for why somebody does that. It could be embarrassment. It could be that they don't want to really give the apology, or it could be that they just are so effusive in their apology that they're making it bigger than it really was. So, but it's still not
All
an
those
apology.
are possibilities.
It's
Yes,
still not
right.
an apology. It still becomes about the speaker rather than the person
Right.
who's receiving it.
And it
So,
leaves the person receiving it confused again.
what happened?
Yeah.
And you're kind of hungry. Sometimes we're just hungry to hear a real apology, and we don't get it.
Yeah. And it brings up another point too. It's quite legitimate that at times, even though I might have done something, I'm not ready to give an apology yet. Either I'm so embarrassed, so judgmental of myself and what I've done, that I can't bear to expose that at this point with it. Or maybe I am not at the point where I think I did that wrong to you. Or that, well, compared to what you did to me, mine was smaller than yours. Therefore,
If you think back on the conflict cycle,
yes.
there's wrong everywhere
Yes.
that we've talked about at other times. And you're focusing on that that tit for tat thing rather than your contribution.
So
and you may just not understand.
Yes.
It may still be at the place where there's assumptions. You have to employ some of the other practices that we've talked about in other episodes.
And let's talk a little bit about those, because just because I may not be ready to apologize doesn't mean that therefore I don't do anything
Right.
With it. So if I've been accused of someone and someone is angry with me and it seems apparent that maybe I do need to apologize, but I'm not there yet. One thing that I can do in this case is to use that skill of restatement that we've talked about in earlier shows.
And curiosity, you know.
Yes, so I restate what I believe is what bothered you about what I've done with it. Just that by itself can have a beginning of a healing effect, because the other person now can say, he's hearing me.
Right.
He's hearing what I'm saying. And then, as you say, I could act curious. I could say, I need to understand a little bit more about this because I don't quite get it.
Understand it.
So can you help me understand what you're thinking and what you're feeling, or what you were thinking and feeling when I did this?
And what you need.
Yes. So those are the curious questions to help explain. I still might not agree with it. It might be totally different from the way I view it. But at least I am exploring that. And I'm giving you respect and credit for having your own point of view about this. And then a final thing that you could do is you could actually give an I message to someone who is accusing you of something that you're not ready yet to say, wait a minute, I need to apologize. It may be, I'm not so sure.
I'm angry at you.
Yes,
yeah.
I'm angry at you. So there's where the components of the I message, which we've again gone over in previous shows, can be a real help in letting the other person know, I'm not quite ready to apologize at that point. I'm still looking at it from this point of view, and I need to share that with you. And from that can lead either problem solving or an apology if it's needed.
And it kind of depends on where your energy is at that point. If you're still fuming, then you might want to talk from the first person and say, when you do blank, I feel. Because you're still, you still have grievances. If you're kind of understanding you might have done something wrong, but you don't quite understand why they're acting the way they're acting, then you could get into the curiosity and the reflective listening and the restating.
Right. Because the last part of the I message is actually inviting, I wish we could work this out, or your friendship is important to me, I would like to work this out. You haven't resolved it, you haven't apologized at this point, but you're giving an indication that the relationship is important enough to want to work at it.
Yeah. Instead of just storming out, walking away, doors slamming and things like that. So during this time when people are not ready to offer an apology, there's still subtle signals sometimes that it's the precursors. They might be ready to think about it, or they're trying to offer something that's not quite an apology, but like an apology. And just being present might be a signal.
Right.
Somebody who stormed away and didn't want to have anything to do with you, wasn't talking to you, was angry. And the fact that they show up in your space and they're willing to share space with you might be a signal that they're getting closer, or that there might be a possibility to have this conversation. They might, make a joke or something that has nothing to do with the topic, but just to kind of lighten the tension. They might say something really nice, again, that isn't connected, that's disconnected, or compliment you. And those might be signals that you could elevate it to an apology, or set the tone for that to happen, or start a conversation. But again, even those lovely things of showing up, of being kind, of saying kind things, don't take the place of an apology. They can kind of smooth things over, but it's still not an apology.
They can hide it for a while.
Yeah.
So why don't we take a look here at what are the steps of a good apology.
And the components,
the components of it, and then maybe give some examples of that.
Good idea.
So the first thing is something that you have mentioned, I know, repeatedly whenever we're using any of these skills, is check the timing
Yeah.
of your approach. This may not be the time.
Yeah.
If either I'm still fuming about something or you are, that may not be the time to do that.
Not only because of the temperament, but the time, you may not have sufficient time to offer.
Yes.
You're 5 minutes from having to be somewhere. Or, yeah.
And so the opportunity disappears at that point. So make sure the timing is good. And then I think the next thing is to make sure that the person who has committed the offense, allegedly, is sure about what your feelings are. Do you feel regret for this? Do you feel as if I may have done something wrong here? And if you are feeling that way, try to be very specific about what it was. I said this word, or I took this action, or I harmed a piece of property or something with it. Try to be specific about what it is you believe is the source
Not only
of the
what
problem.
you believe, but you're checking in with the other person.
Well, that's, and that's an important step too, to check in with them. So then share your feelings about what you did and the effect that you feel that it has had on the other person. And if you're not sure, ask.
Yeah.
You know, you can say, I see, and this is where the body language and so forth you were talking about, I see that you're pretty angry with it. I'm not quite sure why. So can you tell me more? Now you're going into that curious step and saying, tell me more, and inviting the person to share his or her point of view on the situation, which gives you a sense of, oh, I didn't realize that, or I was right on the money, that did go a little wrong. And then the important thing too is to not only share your own feelings about this, but offer to make it right.
Yeah.
What can I do to
fix it, to
fix
repair
this?
it.
Yeah. Or to reassure you that even though I can't take it back, or we can't recapture that moment in time, this is what I can do in the future, or this is a promise, a commitment I can make to you in the future. So offer that, and then check with the person to see, is that sufficient to deal with your feelings at this point? And honor the fact that the other person may not be ready to accept that at this point.
You have to actually say you're sorry too.
Yeah.
In all of that clarity, because you could be saying, I made a mistake. Or, you know, I feel bad. I understand you're hurt. And that's being a little clearer, but you haven't offered anything. You haven't said, I'm sorry.
We haven't shared what your feelings are about it. If you say, not only I'm sorry, but I really am embarrassed, or I really regret having said this, that has much more impact than, oh, sorry about that.
Sorry, or, and you should make it clear, again, what your responsibility is, because you don't want the other person to think that you're just sorry that you're in this predicament.
Yeah, that you got caught.
I'm sorry. Yep, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that we find ourselves in this situation. Particularly me, I'm sorry that So you have to be specific. I'm sorry that my behavior caused this, instead of just, this totally sucks, I'm sorry.
And again, in defining your behavior, that what it was in your behavior that caused this.
Right. You should be aware of nonverbal cues too, like your tone, like, I'm sorry. That isn't
little
really,
sarcasm.
Yeah, that's not sincere, because your tone is not matching the content
Sincerity.
of your message. Yeah. Or like, I'm sorry, or look, you know, your feet down, looking at you're looking at your feet and like, I'm sorry, no eye contact. I think that this is sometimes where we get into trouble with kids. Right,
that's a good point, that oftentimes as parents or even teachers, we feel that we are helping a child to understand how to deal with something that they've done wrong by insisting that they apologize. So we might say to the child, now you go over and you apologize for that. Well, you can't make somebody feel sorry and feel regret. So what typically happens is the child will comply, because the child doesn't want to get into trouble anymore, and therefore will say, I'm sorry. and then it comes across in just the ineffective ways we've been talking about.
Right.
The other child knows that was coerced.
Or even the adult, if it's an adult child,
Yes. And therefore, it doesn't have the effect you would like it to have. It also teaches our children how to dismiss using the words, I'm sorry.
Right, that it's just a throwaway phrase.
That's right, without these elements that we've been talking about, that commitment.
They may or may not understand what it is that has created this situation, so there's no understanding, there's no clarity about what they are.
And there's no need to. All I have to do is say those
and
magical
then I'm
words.
Done. Yeah, and I think adults do that too.
Well, yeah, and that's what we've seen. So as a contrast to that, I think it can be, we can model for our children and the way we apologize, and they see us apologizing in our relationships, and even to them with it. And we can also sit down and ask children, what were you feeling when you did this? This action seemed very wrong to me. Do you feel that way? And so if the child says, yeah, I guess it was wrong, then you can say, it's very appropriate when you feel this way to apologize. It's very different from saying, you go apologize now to that person.
I think it might be easier if you're taught as a child how to do it, because as an adult, I wasn't taught how to do this. Yeah. And I always know when somebody else owes me an apology. And even though I'm in this business of conflict and awareness, when I realize that I owe somebody an apology, it's really hard, I think.
Yes.
I have to kind of gird myself to do this.
I think there's sort of questions that we can reflect on when we're beginning to feel some of that with it. And one of them is, if I feel that I need to apologize, can I apologize without making excuses or shifting the responsibility? If I'm not there yet, don't try the apology yet. Am I fully aware of what I did and how it affected the other person? If I'm not, ask.
Right, do that other work. Yeah.
Right. Am I ready to own my actions and make changes in my behavior? So if I'm not ready to make changes that are necessary, again, don't apologize at that point. So am I ready, excuse me, to try to repair the wrong I did? And what am I looking for in the apology? Is it for me, so I can feel good again? Is it for the other party? Or is it for our relationship? There are reasons for all of that.
An apology should be given without any expectation of reciprocity, like I apologize, now you owe me an apologize. You should just give it. It shouldn't be given with the expectation that the other person has to take it.
Right.
It shouldn't be an obligation. And it may not be accepted right away. But having done it and gone through the process might progress the closure.
Right.
If you, it just may kind of grow it.
So I hope these ideas that we have presented here will be helpful to our viewers in when it's necessary to make an apology, and also to teach our children how to apologize. So we hope to see you next time for another show next month, and hopefully Tracy will be with us as well.